Hello, my name is Veronica Shanklin. I am the founder and CEO of Dementia Care Warriors, and we are joined today by our friend Jessica Guthrie of Caregiving Collide. And Jessica has joined us today to talk about preparing to care. And this is something that people have approaching me, I'm sure you, about. They see us on our caregiving journeys and they're asking the question of, what can I be doing now to prepare for my aging loved one? And so I just wanted to have a quick conversation with Jessica as a seasoned caregiver and as I'm a seasoned caregiver. I know there's probably some things that maybe you wish you would have done differently, or maybe some things that you would recommend that people do right now as they're kind of early on in this possibility of caregiving, because all of our loved ones hopefully will age. And with aging, there comes certain challenges. Sometimes it's a diagnosis, and sometimes it's just getting older. And so just want to kind of have a quick conversation with you. Before we get started, will you tell us just a little bit about your background and who you are?
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I am Jessica C. Guthrie, and I am the daughter of Constance Guthrie. I have been my mother's full-time caregiver for the last 11 years while she has been living with Alzheimer's disease. She was the age of 65 when she was diagnosed, and I was 26. So for over a decade, I have been a long distance caregiver. I then moved home to care for her directly at home, living in my childhood bedroom. And we are now living with the most advanced stage of the disease, where I care for her, doing every activity from feeding, eating, drinking, changing, so that she can thrive in this current state that she's in. So that's a little bit about me and my caregiving journey. In my free time, I work with companies and organizations to connect the caregiver experience to the realities of the things that they're creating to support family caregivers. So that's me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you were pretty young when you started your
Mm-hmm.
caregiving journey. You were in your 20s, and that's clearly not an age where we were thinking about caregiving. And then I was 34 when I started my caregiving journey, so
Mm-hmm.
also fairly young and not thinking about caregiving. However, things happen. And so it is important for us to start thinking ahead of time. Maybe some people are not thinking about it at 26, but our parents are aging. So my first question is, what are some early signs that it might be time to start preparing? Even if your parents are still active and independent right now, is
Mm-hmm.
it just that number of age, or can you think of other things like red flags, or that people should look out for?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily go by age because so much can happen regardless of how old you are. I also will say, 1 in 4 Americans is a caregiver. So even if you're not thinking or calling yourself a caregiver, you were likely already thinking about what it means to look out for mom, dad, auntie, uncle, grandma, grandpa, or like what they might need to make sure that they're okay, or checking in on them. And so I would actually argue that many of you are already thinking about care responsibilities without holding a title of caregiver. Anywho, with that said, I think that caregiving, or like becoming a caregiver, often happens overnight. And so even if your people are healthy and they seem fine, they're still working, they're traveling, all of that, now is the perfect time to start just engaging in conversations. Do you even know the wishes of your parents? Do you know what foundational tools they have in place? Do you even know if there's a will or a trust in place? Do you know, or do you have the power to make decisions should something happen to them medically and they can't advocate for themselves? So I feel like the easiest, I don't want to say easy, but the thing that you have the most control over right now, while things are seemingly okay, is to get those foundations in place. Because the moment that something happens, whether it's a stroke or a diagnosis or an accident, all of that becomes 10 times harder. And what you don't want is to be caught up in that in the midst of grieving or trying to help your person in an emergency or crisis. So the
Right.
foundational documents, but then also, I think it's really important, and I wish I would have done, had I just been more aware in my 20s, but just like, how does my mom want to be cared for? How does she want to be treated as she ages? Because I feel like knowing that will allow you to make thoughtful and intentional decisions about the types of care, who will care for your person, where will you care for your person, should that time ever come.
Yep, absolutely. I think because there are some people who are like, I don't want y'all to stop your lives to care for me, put me in a nice facility, and I will be fine. There are parents who are telling their kids that today, and they're having those
Mm-hmm.
conversations,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, to the point of you want to know those things. So, yeah, definitely asking those questions, having those conversations now is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the point, though, of people now. So maybe you're helping with paying bills, maybe you're doing the grocery shopping. I know a mutual friend of ours, Alma, she mentioned calling her mom to make sure she locks the door at night. You know,
Mm-hmm.
those sorts of things are like kind of that subtle caregiving that's going on, even if you don't give yourself that formal title.
Mm-hmm.
We're still kind of in those early stages of, they're at the point where they need a little help.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. So I think something else, back to the point of people not realizing they're caregivers, what people tell me is until they're burnt out or overwhelmed,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be that those little things I just mentioned are adding up, or um, they're actually full blown caregiving and it just kind of hit them out of nowhere, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
I was going to say it's those little things adding up, or they've just jumped into crisis mode, right? Because they're reacting in the moment. I also think that people don't realize they're caregivers sometimes because they're very much attached to their daughter, to the title of being a good daughter or a good son, or just fulfilling what has been ingrained in them, especially culturally. Different cultures have always said it is the right thing to do to show up and take care of your person without even calling it care. And so some people are making those choices and don't realize they're burnt out because they're just doing what they're supposed to do. But what I would offer is, even before you get to a place of burnout, there's power in owning a title, or power in actually giving yourself the label of care partner or caregiver, because the moment that you actually identify yourself as that, you actually open up the door to people being able to support you and or to seek out resources that you often don't even think about when you're just an autopilot of being a good child, right? And so I would offer that as just a counter to, okay, do the little things and acknowledge that those little things are part of being a strong care partner for your loved one. And because I see myself as that, I am deserving of resources, access to information, and education so I can be a better person for my loved one.
Absolutely. And planning, once you accept that, then you start to think about, I need to be planning. We need to be planning. When you
Mm-hmm.
don't accept that role or don't think of it in that way, you're just moving through life as, this is just the
Mm-hmm.
way things are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you talked about financial documents and those conversations. I would say, what do you think are the top three? There's tons of things we could be doing, clearly. But what would you say are the top three things that someone could be doing now to prepare to care?
In preparing for care, I think the top documents are, number one, getting a power of attorney in place, or at least making sure you know who the power of attorney for your person is, whether it's you or someone else. But like, get that in place, because what I'll tell you is that you can't do anything without a power of attorney in place. Okay. The second thing connected to that, honestly, is actually a medical power of attorney. And so, like, should something happen to your person, you can actually make decisions on their behalf. You know their wishes, which I think is just so important. The third thing, that I think, depending on who you are, you might grow up not talking about these things openly, but is there a will in place? Or is there a document that articulates the desires of, what your people would want should something happen to them? Ideally, you're talking about a trust, and like your your assets are connected to said trust. But understanding that document of a will is is actually critical because it'll actually determine how money gets distributed. It'll determine the choices that get made in terms of homes, resources, and that will either make or break your life post caregiving in many ways that we don't often talk about.
Do you have any suggestions on how to approach that conversation, which can be kind of a sensitive conversation?
Yeah. So my mom is living with Alzheimer's disease. And so there was a lot of like confusion and short term memory loss. But I'm grateful that because I'm an only child, she very much trusted me. And so I was able to move things quickly. But I don't think she ever had any like visceral reactions to me talking about things like a will and power of attorney. But what I would offer for anyone now, as you are preparing and being proactive, having the conversation of like, I am not trying to put you in the ground any faster. I'm not trying to, bring death upon us. But what I am thinking is I'm thinking about your legacy. I'm
Right.
actually thinking about the long-term like impact on the family by having these conversations. And I do think when you shift that perspective of like, this is not about death, it's actually about the legacy. It's actually about how we provide for our family. Like while you're here and post you being here, it makes it feel like, oh, this is just as important as me figuring out how I'm gonna pay my mortgage, right? Like they're the same level of like critical nature. So that's what I would offer. I also think that if you do get pushback, sometimes it's because the process seems daunting. And I do think families shy away because they don't know where to go. And so I would also say part of this is less of a document, but start seeking out an elder care attorney or an estate attorney so that you have someone who can thoughtfully walk you through what is real, what is not. Like we hear a lot of things that aren't true, right? And so get someone who can really educate you and educate your family without the fear and the hoopla is what I would offer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would also recommend breaking it up into smaller conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to inundate them with this full, all of these
Mm-hmm.
things at once. So maybe at some point you're talking about finances, or maybe at some point you're talking about what would you, how would, if you could not take care of yourself, what would you want us to do as your family? Like maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
little conversations here and there. And
Mm-hmm.
again, fortunately, I was also blessed that my mom and my grandmother both trusted me and that we could have these conversations. But I do know of many stories where that is not the case, and people are really secretive and really private.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to, bring in a professional to help have the conversation, and to your point, frame it in a way that you are trying to help them look after the families. 100%. I think also, if it is a challenging conversation, make sure you're in a comfortable space.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's let's go to lunch at their favorite restaurant, or maybe it's after a doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
Um,
I will never
so
forget sitting in Ruby Tuesdays with my mom and a post-it note. Okay.
mhm.
And I was like, Mom, okay, this is what we're going to do with your mortgage, right? Like, this is how I'm going to help with your home. And she was like, okay, walk me through it again. But I did it after she had eaten. We had had a little salad bar at Ruby Tuesdays, and she was comfortable. And so I do think your point of a place where their guard is down and like they're willing to engage matters.
Hmm. And I think it's helpful because there's not anything else you could be doing right now. It's
Right.
like you're not gonna be like, all right, never mind, get up and leave out the room because you're at home, and
Mm-hmm.
so it kind of provides a little more cushion for
Yeah.
those types of sensitive conversations. Something else as we prepare to care is to talk about family dynamics.
Mm.
Again, we talk to a lot of caregivers, and there are a lot of different situations. Every once in a while, I'll run into a family who seems to run like a well oiled machine. Everybody is cooperating, everybody's supportive, everybody's helping, but as we know, that is not always the case. So, I guess my question is, what types of conversations would you suggest that people are having before anything gets to that point? Is it because I always say, let's talk about who's responsible for what,
Yeah.
because we all have our strengths. And so maybe you're good with finances, and you're good with tech, and you're good with cooking. And so let's talk about what that looks like
Yeah.
should we get there. What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts?
So I'm an only child, and so I think I had warped perceptions of what I thought family would do when it came to my mom getting sick. And when I say warped perceptions, my perceptions were truly rooted in what I saw on TV or what I had made up in my mind about the role of family. And what I quickly learned is that like that was 100% in my mind and not reality. And that I wish I would have been more clear on the front end about the things that I needed and wanted from them versus assuming that because they are quote unquote family, it automatically means they're going to show up and be supportive. So I'll name that. And that like that is why I'm so thoughtful about making sure people have intentional conversations proactively, because I don't want anyone ever caught up in the assumption that someone's going to show up for them, right? So with that, if you're someone who has siblings, I've seen this happen with many folks where it's like each sibling takes on a different role, to your point. Like I have a friend who, her brother does all the finances. Her sister was the one that was like doing all the medical stuff. And then she was the one that was just going back and forth to provide the emotional support, right? Either way, they had broken it up against siblings. If amongst siblings, if you're someone who doesn't have siblings, or maybe there's a strained sibling relationship and your aunts, uncles, whatever, I think it is important to name, right, who is going to be the person to step into care. And whomever that is, I think it's actually then saying, and here's how I'm going to need support from you. Support for me when I'm not under stress looks like A, B, and C. Because you're now giving people giving them the information so that when the stress does come or when the crisis does come, they know exactly what to do. I often think it's hard. I will say this, it is hard to proactively have this convo because you don't really see people's true colors till things hit the fan.
Absolutely.
And so maybe what I would also offer is if you are not in the space of having proactive conversations, when the need to care does arrive, I think the encouragement is to have the family meeting sooner than later, to name what your boundaries are, what you can and cannot do, to name what you might need to be able to show up well, but also to keep your loved one at the center. I think sometimes the family convos get caught up in people's egos, what is easy or hard for them, or what they don't want to do, or what they don't want to see. And it's like, hold the phone. None of this is about us. This is actually about ensuring our person has the love and the care and dignity and respect that they deserve.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's our center, what does that mean for the choices we need to make together?
Mm-hmm. I think I would also add, if you are a solo caregiver or you're going to be a primary caregiver, to start thinking about resources. And this might not be before you get a diagnosis, because you might not even know what types of resources you need to look for. But early on in this caregiving process, to start looking at what types of resources are out there so you can start to form your support circle. Or is it your church? Do they have any resources available there that you might not be aware of? Is there a senior center? Is there what options do you have? Because that's important.
It's what options, what resources, and like expand your understanding of family, expand your definition of family and the village, right? Because I'll be honest, I think the people who showed up the most for me were not people that are blood. It was actually local community resources, former colleagues, right? Friends. And I do think knowing those people before you start caring allows you to make specific asks and for people to really wrap their arms around you when you need it.
It's community, and community is all of those things. It's coworkers, it's church, it's family, it's friends. And I'm the same way. My friends have really stepped in. I have a couple of friends who will step in, and I trust them to watch my mom if I need to run out or I have an event to go to, because care is expensive. And having people that you trust, even every once in a while, so you can go to the grocery store, is financing that you won't have to consider, because caregiving is expensive, I think. And that's something else, generally speaking. What is the financial situation? And early on this conversation, if there's a diagnosis, in this conversation with siblings, with whoever else is in that immediate circle, is anyone able to put in on care?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I
Yes.
think connected to that too, in the land of being proactive, right? If your loved one or your parents are folks who are working people, meeting with elder attorneys now to figure out how to move money around so that you can be able to make some financial choices around paying for care, because every state is different when it comes to leveraging state-based aid like a Medicaid and or state-based resources. I also think having the conversation of like, what of their assets are available to use and or start to sell so you have the cash flow to be able to pay, because if you decide to put your loved one in a facility, you're easily thinking 10K to 14K a month,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so there's that. Also, if you plan to leverage Medicaid, you got a 5-year look back period. And so oftentimes people wait too late. And so having those convos now to figure out what would my person actually qualify for helps you when that time does come 5, 6 years down the road. So people don't talk about that, but that's the strategery that you need to be doing now, well before your person gets a diagnosis, because our current government and like our policies don't actually look out for you in the moment. They actually honor folks who made these decisions much
Years.
earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not selfish. You're not playing a system. You're actually preparing yourself to be able to utilize the things that are in place for your family.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hmm.
I mean, I think to your point, what you just said about care in facility care being $10,000 to $14,000, that's something that people have no clue about. You
And
know,
ain't no resources. That's
no,
coming from you, right?
take it out of pocket, out of your pocket, pull it together. And I think that, so I mean, this is a little off topic, but still on topic to the point of, well, we can just put her in a nursing home. Probably not.
Hmm.
The chances are that that won't be as easy as you think it is,
Hmm.
or, well, why don't you, work full time and then you can pay, and, like, you don't know how, but your people are paying $35 an hour to care for a loved one. And I don't think that the general public realizes just how expensive this is and how expensive it's going to be. So that is another point to make. Finances, to start getting those in order. Long-term care insurance. Look into that. Even us 40s and 50s, even younger people, to look into that so that your family has something to pull from. People don't realize what happens with long-term care insurance is people are waiting for like this magic moment, like, oh, we're going to hold on to it until they're 80. They may not make it to 80. You can start pulling out of a long-term care insurance policy long before and use it for care when you need it. So all of these kind of smaller details around finances, around insurance, around care are things that people should be looking into early on,
Yes.
because when the stuff hits the fan,
Hmm.
it's going to be even more challenging.
And it all happens so quick, and you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I don't have the capacity to make these decisions. I think along the same lines too. I know we're talking about your parents or the folks that you're caring for, but also making sure you have those things in place for you. The
Hmm.
data is crystal clear, is that the likelihood of the caregiver having some sort of catastrophic health event is actually very high if you as you were caring for your loved one. And so making sure that while you're thinking about your loved one's insurance policies and their wills and trusts and all of that, you should be thinking about that for you, so that, right, like you don't leave your family or like your life, in shambles in the midst of caring for someone else, because that often happens. We give, we give, we give, and yet we haven't poured into our own cups, and then we're left with nothing at the end.
I want to kind of go back to the emotional and mental piece of this, because your loved one, and we're not just talking about Alzheimer's or dementia, clearly that's kind of the space that we work in, but um, your loved one has their own personality, their own struggles, their own story, their own life, and that all plays into you caring for them and the role reversal that we go through, specifically with dementia caregiving. Um, and so I think it's important to early on in this journey, like, get an understanding and get your mindset, think about your boundaries. Are there certain things that if it gets to this point, I know that I'm going to have to take a step back? Um, Can you think of any type of emotional preparation that
Mhm.
people can do? And I would again say specifically around dementia caregiving, but just either way.
Yeah, I think it's really important to make sure to be clear that this is a disease or a diagnosis that your person is navigating. It is not their person. And so, for instance, my mom is living with Alzheimer's disease. She is not Alzheimer's disease. And I share that because I think for my just like emotional bandwidth, it helps me like see my mom as a human being who is navigating very real struggles and needs for me to help make sense of the struggles she's navigating
Mhm.
versus me approaching my mom with like anger and resentment and frustration because she's no longer the same person she once was. And so
Mhm.
the advice there in terms of like just mental and emotional preparation is to really make sure you're clear-eyed about not making your person the thing that they're fighting, but
Mhm.
they are a person fighting the thing and you get to fight that thing with them.
Mhm.
I also think from an emotional standpoint, there you hit it, like knowing your boundaries, like knowing what your point is so that you know when to walk away and not walk away like leave, but like to take the break. And I think that so often we go. We never actually give ourselves the space to like reset and recalibrate, but that is actually the most critical thing you need to do for yourself. And so knowing your limits, knowing your triggers, and maybe you won't know them until it starts to happen, but be aware of them and take note of them so that you can then give yourself the space to recalibrate. The thing that we often don't talk about too is bringing other people in to emotionally support you. This is not a solo journey. Caring for anything, you can't do it alone. And so, sure, you might have your friends and family, but also like it's okay to actually get your professional help lined up too, right? Like whether it's a therapist or any sort of like counselor, because you're going to need someone to bounce the stuff off like with, and it can't always be the friends who call you, you know, it can't always be the family. It needs a person who just gets it and understands, but it's like separate. And so that's, I think that we don't talk about it enough, but when it
Mhm.
comes to just like your emotional well-being, having the practices and the discipline in place, but also having the people in place to support you matters.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's also support groups,
Yeah.
you know, which are becoming much more popular and available because there's now lots of virtual options.
Hmm.
They're popping up all over the country. Dementia Care Warriors have support groups. I
Hmm.
think that there's something therapeutic about talking to other people who are going through a similar situation. You know, so yeah, definitely that emotional preparation is important. I think we have kind of touched on all of the thoughts I had. Yes, I was going to ask you.
um Sometimes I know that we're talking about preparing to care.
Hmm.
And I think in that is an assumption that you will say yes to care.
Hmm.
I also just want to acknowledge and say out loud that it is also okay if you are not the person to say yes to care for your loved ones. There are plenty of folks that I talk to on a daily basis that are like, actually, that's not for me. I know
Hmm.
my limits and like doing the direct care, that's not gonna, I can't do that. But I can write some checks or I can, you know, manage the system, but me
Hmm.
being a direct caregiver. And so I offer that because I think sometimes people get caught up in the archetypes or the assumptions that they will have to say yes.
Hmm.
And sometimes your greatest act of love is saying no
Hmm.
and then coordinating the other people that will show up for your loved one in the best way. So I just want to articulate that is that sometimes preparing is getting the team in place that maybe doesn't include you. And that's also okay.
Hmm. Yes, 100%. 100%. I think that the thing about preparing is you're protecting your future self and your loved one.
Yeah.
know? It's not just about your loved one. It's also about you and making sure that you are taken care of in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do want to put a question out there for people to think about is you don't have to do everything at once.
Mm.
You know, there are little things here and there that you can do, but I would love for people to respond wherever you're watching this and tell us what is one thing that you will do now to start to prepare to care for your loved one. for your aging loved one. And it could just be sharing this conversation with a sibling or sharing this conversation with a family member so that you get the talk going, you know.
Hmm.
But I'm just curious to know what people would would do. And do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think, it'll never be perfect. You can prepare and think about all the things and still be caught off guard, right? Or still, be thrown for a loop, and that's okay. I think the power of preparation is just giving you the tools to be able to react well when crisis or when change comes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is the thing that sets you apart from anyone else who didn't take the time to be
Mm-hmm.
prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Because actually now having the tools in place sets you up to be a better advocate. It sets you up to ask better questions. It sets you up to operate from a place of curiosity
Mm-hmm.
versus a place of like reaction and emotion. And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe my parting words are like, you are not just preparing because you're thinking something is going to happen. You're preparing so that you can be your best self as things do happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can show up well in whatever system you're working within. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's the piece that we don't often think about.
Yes, thank you. I think to your point about tools, this is a toolkit,
Yeah.
you know, and you might need a hammer, you might need a screwdriver, you know, depending on what your situation is, but you have your toolkit with the things that you need in it. And when the time comes, you're prepared. And so I always tell caregivers you want to stay on the offense and not the defense.
Hmm.
So I am going to close out the conversation with that. Thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing your story and your thoughts on this very important topic. And stay tuned for more from Dementia Care Warriors as we continue to share and education and resources and support for dementia family caregivers. Thank you.
Of course.